There has been no shortage of mistreated killers in the 9 years since DBD's release. I know damn well a massive PNG of the pig just popped up in your mind, but she's far from the only case. Just for a quick speed run of some of the most notable ones we've had in no particular order: the Wraith, who was borderline unplayable for over 2 years until late 2018, where he got his old Windstorm add-ons base kit, buffs to almost every aspect of his base kit, and an add-on pass. Freddy, who released as the #1 weakest killer in DBD history, only to be met with huge nerfs a mere 2 weeks after his release. The Pig, who has been nerfed over 25 times since her release, despite never being very good to begin with, and still isn't worth playing to this day. Skull Merchant, who was intentionally gutted to the point of being almost unplayable because the devs couldn't take time away from designing new DLCs to fix their already existing ones, also being left in the dirt to this very day. Leatherface, who had the same overheat mechanic that Billy was given, despite being leagues weaker than Billy ever was, purely to stop him from face camping people, and despite his semi-rework a few years ago, he still remains as one of the worst killers in the game. But that's old news. You've likely heard about all of these cases before. If you haven't, there are videos covering these topics on my channel, but there's one killer whose behaviour had completely forgotten about for 9 years. A killer so weak for so long with no real changes in nearly an entire decade. But not just any killer. I'm talking about DBD's most important killer. The sole reason this game is where it is today. The one character that paved the way for DBD to transform from a small indie game into an absolute juggernaut in the horror genre, and that killer is Michael Myers. Our story starts all the way back on the 25th of October 2016 with the release of the Halloween chapter, bringing us Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, and all of their respective perks. This chapter was absolutely monumental for many reasons. First of all, this was the first paid DLC that DBD ever got, with the only DLC before this being completely free, that being the Nurse. More importantly for this game's future, this was the first officially licensed content in the game, which likely put DBD on the radar for other license holders as sort of a, hey, if they can handle Halloween's IP properly, then they can probably handle ours too. I say officially licensed because the game had various off-brand versions of existing IPs from the start. For instance, the Trapper has been pretty much confirmed to just be their version of Jason Voorhees, the Hillbilly was their version of Leatherface, the Nurse is heavily inspired by the Silent Hill nurses, and the whole hooking concept itself is also inspired by Leatherface's meat hooks in the films. But the Shape is no off-brand knockoff. This was the real deal. Michael Myers himself was here in all his glory. The third and most important thing it did was put Dead by Daylight on the map not just to license holders, but to the wider gaming community in general. Before, if you asked somebody if they heard of DBD, their response would likely be something along the lines of, no, never heard of it. But now, that changed completely to, oh, that's the game with Michael Myers in, isn't it? I might get it, is it any good? The release of the Halloween DLC made a huge splash, starting new metas for both killers and survivors, making the chapter a must-buy if you wanted the highest chance of winning, no matter which role you played. To put it simply, this chapter was an absolute game changer. Like this segue to today's sponsor, Raycon. The Raycon everyday earbuds give you great sounding audio at an affordable price, with Raycon's quick charge function giving you an almighty 90 minutes worth of battery in only 10 minutes of charging, with a full charge giving you 32 hours of battery life, so they're always ready when you need them most. But the game changer I mentioned comes in the form of their perfect synergy with some nighttime ASMR. Their sleek form factor allows them to sit flush in your ears so you don't feel them pressing into your head as you sleep, so you can enjoy ASMR comfortably. Pair that with their active noise cancellation and you'll be sleeping through any noises that would normally wake you. They're lightweight and come with multiple different sized hips, so you can get the perfect fit to ensure they're comfortable and sitting snug without any risk of falling out, even when you're working out. Go to buyraycon.com/Ardetha to get 20% off everything site-wide. Thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Initially, Myers was a whole new experience that caught many survivors off guard due to his stealth aspect, particularly in Tier 1. While technically Myers wasn't the first stealth killer, as the Wraith was already in the game, it was a different ballpark entirely. The Wraith would have to manually cloak at the start of each match, which would give a map-wide, directionally accurate audio cue, letting the survivors know immediately that it's a Wraith and they should keep their eyes peeled, where he spawned, and would have to give them another audio cue when he uncloaked in order to hit people. Myers, on the other hand, no such warnings. No audio cue at the start of the match letting you know it's a stealth killer, no audio cue required before he can hit you, nothing. Players were so used to zoning out while on gens, only really paying attention to skill checks and only locking in once they heard a heartbeat or a bell. They'd be completely relaxed on their gen, assuming it's a trapper still setting up, when all of a sudden they're yanked off a gen and taken to a hook with no pre-warning. Of course, to us modern day players, it's common sense to keep looking around while you're on a gen, at least until you know it's not a stealth killer. But with things like Tinkerer and Trail of Torment, it's a good habit to do it at all times. But back then, it was a whole new skill that players had to learn. Only a couple of weeks after his release, Myers would receive his first change. Nerf. Myers can no longer stalk multiple survivors simultaneously for fast tier-ups. Evil Within will now only target the closest survivor on screen. Even all those years ago, I never liked this change. Countering stalking by breaking line of sight has always been a pretty easy task, and if a team of survivors all make the mistake of letting Myers group stalk, then that should be their mistake to deal with. That being said, it was a new killer, and with so many eyes being on DBD at the time, the last thing they'd want to do is release a killer that's game-breakingly overpowered and ruins the entire experience for everyone. So, I suppose I can understand them being tentative with it. Once the dust had settled, it turned out that Myers was in a pretty decent spot for those days. Out of the 5 killers in the game, he placed 3rd, bang in the middle. Nurse was doing nurse things even back then. Billy was considered strong, fun and fair for the most part, unless Instasaw was involved. Myers was a fun stealth killer with crazy snowball potential from a well-timed tier 3 mixed with some slugging. Trapper had some serious anti-loop from his traps paired with the old graphics and map designs, but just like today, he was ruined by gen rushing. And Wraith had almost nothing going for him without double windstorm add-ons, a rare and expensive treat that people couldn't afford very often back then with how grindy the game was. So with a pretty average killer release, nothing too extreme, Behaviour's work here was clearly done. So work on Myers was complete until further notice. With Myers' release being complete, he was moved to the rearview mirror, becoming a distant memory of DBD's first step into mainstream success. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, months turned to years, and Myers was still yet to be revisited. We saw various new killer releases: Hag, Doctor, Huntress, Bubba, Freddy, Pig, Clown, almost every single one of which was stronger than Mr. Myers. Pair that with various changes to the base game and the player base's playstyle, gens were popping faster than ever before, so his slow start in tier 1 was proving to be a huge hindrance, almost to the same degree as the Trapper, but without the payoff of strong anti-loop. Looping was now mainstream and loops were ran more tightly and efficiently than ever before, so him having no other way of ending chases other than just walking at people made him an absolute joke to anybody who knew what a pallet was. Base vault speed was increased for all killers, making Myers' percentage-based vault speed bonus in tier 2 and 3 less valuable than before. Survivors had learned to look around while repairing gens, so there would be no more free grabs and a lot less free hits too. Ultimately, the game itself, as well as the player base, had evolved so much since his release and left him in the dirt. How was he meant to compete with the Doctor's scouting prowess and chase pressure, the Huntress's raw kill potential from hatchets with old Insta-Rev and Tinkerer, Bubba's pressure from the pallet shreds, the Pig's gen slowdown, or the Clown's intense chase pressure? To put it simply, he couldn't. The only perceived strength Myers still had going for him was his insta-kill Mori potential from Judas Tombstone and Tombstone Peace, which have always been troublesome for lower skilled survivors, but really, even with either of these add-ons, he was still weak. Judas Tombstone came with the unique downside of reducing his movement speed by an almighty 9% for the entire match, even in tier 1 and 2, which would then mean it would be borderline impossible for him to chase anyone at all, Mori or not, without the use of Play With Your Food, which wastes a valuable perk slot. Tombstone Peace, on the other hand, didn't reduce his movement speed, but would instantly remove him from tier 3 after each kill, forcing him to restalk again. But to be honest, with how strong the Instamori is, he could live with those downsides. The real problem that both of these add-ons share is the absolutely monumental increase in how long it takes to get to tier 3, making it take a whopping 3 times longer. Back then, it already took long enough to get to tier 3 with double stalk speed add-ons, let alone losing one of the speed add-ons, since the tombstone will take up one of the slots, and then multiplying it by 3. Even with slowdown perks, a tombstone Myers would never really reach tier 3 before all 5 gens are popped unless playing at seriously low levels. Things needed to change. So, 1 year and 9 months after Myers' release, on the 24th of July 2018 in patch 2.1.0, after the release of 7 more killers, he would receive a change. Buff. Increased his movement speed in tier 1 from 103.5% to 105%. Oh yes, I bet you forgot about that, didn't you? Back in those days, tier 1 Myers moved only 3.5% faster than survivors, and that's only when going in a straight line. Due to collision boxes, if you bring looping into the equation, he'd be straight up slower than survivors. Pair that with Judith's tombstone, and he'd walk at a similar speed to the nurse. Needless to say, a buff of 1.5% movement speed in tier 1, the tier he spends the least amount of time in, didn't help him much. Especially considering 105% still made him the slowest killer in the game apart from the nurse, even slower than the huntress for example. Myers was still nothing but a relic of a bygone era, a simpler time, when walking at people was enough to secure kills. Things still needed to change, but did they? More time passed. Again, months passed, nothing. A year passed, nothing. And finally, on the 2nd year, a technical change, which had the side effect of disabling Myers' ability to stalk while in tier 3. This served no real use towards his power, but did make people glow bright white or bright red, which helped him scout for people, but still, no real changes to his kit. That was it. The devs had well and truly forgotten about Michael Myers. Place your bets in the comments now as to how many years it took until they changed him again. Go on, I'll give you a moment. And the answer is 6.5 years. It wouldn't be until the 28th of November 2024 when Myers would receive his first meaningful changes. If we disregard the meaningless 1.5% movement speed buff, this would be his first real change since the group stalking nerf, meaning it took 8 entire years for Myers to get a real change. And what were they? Buff. Increased his movement speed in tier 1 from 105% to 110%. Buff. Doubled the amount of evil within available from all survivors before it runs out and he can't stalk anymore. Buff. Leveling up from tier 1 to 2 now requires 40% less stalking. Buff. Myers now stalks 10 times faster than he used to at long distance. Nerf. Myers now stalks 40% slower than he used to at close range. Nerf. Judith's tombstone, tombstone piece, and fragrant tuft of hair now increase the amount of time required to hit tier 3 by another 100 to 200% on top of their old values to offset the new stalking speed buffs. A whole host of buffs to Evil Within, making tiering up much faster across the board, a genuinely impactful movement speed buff in tier 1, and making it much less likely for Myers to be left without an ability for the rest of the match. Despite this long list of huge buffs really helping him compared to before, Myers is still one of the weakest killers in the game, only really beating killers like Legion and Skull Merchant. That's because, even with these buffs, he can still only really walk at people. I'm not sure what other buffs could help him outside of new effects entirely. Perhaps moving 5% faster in tier 3? Or maybe spreading out his built-in vault speed boost to affect pallet breaking too? Maybe you guys have some better ideas.